Thank you. Back to our community colleges.
All right. So as I noted before, the California community colleges are really in an unprecedented era of reform and innovation. And, I think what really epitomizes that is our Student Success Task Force. So that the task force was created by Senate Bill 1143 in 2011. When Jack Scott was the chancellor of our system, the system convened the Board of Governors convened a task force that spent the better part of a year coming up with 22 recommendations. These 22 recommendations were unanimously approved by the Board of Governors in January of 2012. And this launched a broad set of reforms, and I'm going to step through a few of them right now. These recommendations that came out of the Student Success Task Force really touched on every aspect of the way the community colleges operate. They're heavily focused on student support services. Some of the issues that have been talked about today, counseling, academic advisement, education planning. And at its core, if you had to really boil it down, it's the community colleges under the Student Success Task Force vision need to do a better job of helping students when they arrive at a community college to identify an educational goal and develop an education plan that helps them to get to that goal. So it's essentially providing a lot more structure for students. And so the other aspects of the Student Success Task Force plan included changes in instruction, improvements in our basic skills programs, modifications in our course offerings on our campuses, changes to our financial aid programs for the first time requiring that in order for a student to be eligible for the Board of Governors fee waiver, that they needed to meet certain academic performance thresholds. And then a very key part of the Student Success Task Force plan was the development of a new accountability system called the scorecard. And the scorecard is a comprehensive accountability system that provides a tremendous level of transparency around our system, focusing on completion, both the intermediate, kind of the tipping point metrics that are kind of leading indicators of student success, as well as the ultimate completion metrics around degrees, certificates, and transfer. In addition, the scorecard allows for easy disaggregation of data by student groups, subgroups, race, ethnicity, age, gender, and so it is ideal for identifying achievement gaps and helping our system to focus on closing those gaps. So these 22 recommendations that were unanimously adopted by our Board of Governors kicked us into the implementation phase. And SB 1456, carried by Senator Lowenthal, the Student Success Act, was really the anchor of that work. And through that legislation, the legislature and the governor helped us to establish a new program called the Student Success and Support Program that has subsequently provided $285 million to our colleges to build out counseling, academic advisement, education planning services, orientation, all these structures on the local level that are making a significant difference to our students. In addition, the legislature and the governor created the Student Equity Program. So again, more resources, $155 million going to our colleges, specifically to close achievement gaps. And very much germane to the conversation you were having earlier about our need to improve our achievement levels, particularly for African American students, Latino students, both in terms of participation and also completion, if the state is going to meet its objectives in having the skilled workforce we're going to need to compete. The other initiatives include implementing a common assessment system across our colleges, building online education planning tools so that students can keep better track of their education and their progress towards their educational objective in an online format. There's a tremendous potential for technology to help students better manage their educations, and also to take some of the workload off of counselors by using the benefits of automation and technology. And then lastly, I would note the creation of an Institutional Effectiveness Partnership Initiative. This is an initiative that is, in a lot of ways, the culmination of our student success work, in which we as a system are pulling together, identifying those successful practices that have been identified through through research, through the innovation awards, through our analysis of data. And once we find those successful models, and there are many of them out there across our system, what we're doing is working to provide training to other colleges in how to adopt those models, how to scale them up rapidly. So we're very optimistic that we're on the cusp of really seeing some significant movement in the needle on student success as we scale up these effective practices. So I included in the handout, there are a number of charts. I don't, given time constraints, I don't know if we want to go through all this, but essentially the pattern we're seeing in our colleges at this point in time is that we're seeing improvements in the momentum point metrics in terms of course completion, our basic skills students completing their basic skills sequences, ESL completion, students completing 30 units, 3-term persistence rates. All these metrics are moving in the right direction, which tells us that these reforms that are being implemented are having a positive effect. On page 11, though, I think it's important we drill down a little bit and kind of look at this story in terms of, and it'll highlight the intersegmental aspect of this conversation. You'll see that in the on page 11, these two graphs show our transfers to both CSU and to UC, and you see this pattern of them peaking in around 2010, 11. Or 11, 12 with the UC system, and then going through a period of being flat and actually dropping. And this corresponds with times in the UC and CSU budgets when they didn't have the enrollment capacity to accept our students. And so it shows you how interconnected our systems are. Our students who were transfer eligible were being shut out from UC and CSU because they didn't have the resources to take them. That was a big blow to our productivity, to our completion agenda when those happen. And then, and if you flip over to the next page, on page 12, you'll see this is the completion metric for a system, and it has a troubling trend there. It's dropping. There's a story behind this that I'll tell, and then I'm going to hand this over to Vaughn. But what's happening in this completion metric on page 12 is that the students that were in our system over the last during the period when the UC and CSU transfers were being shut down significantly reduced our number of completions. Transfer is a major piece of what we do. And when our students can't transfer, it reduced the number of completions we were having, and that's what you see in the graph on the page, top of page 12. It's the students that were in that cohort. Our researchers have looked at it pretty thoroughly, and we're confident that's the trend here. The positive side of this is that recently UC and CSU have been taking more of our transfer students. We fully expect that this graph is going to start turning up, not only because of the transfer dynamic, but in addition, those tipping point metrics, those intermediate momentum metrics that I was talking about before, are all trending in the right direction. So that should also ripple through here and take these numbers in the right direction. But that's something we're going to be looking very carefully at. The scorecard provides an unprecedented level of transparency around these metrics, and we invite you to hold us accountable to that and continue to have this conversation with us about what we're doing to serve not only more students, but to help more of our students succeed. So with that, yeah.
Just some closing comments. The student success reforms that you actually drove resulted in repositioning California from somewhere in the middle of the pack to actually being recognized as one of the most accountable community college systems in the nation. I know because the White House Domestic Policy Council and the White House Economic Council had me there in December to share our progress with other states. So we encourage the legislature to borrow from the same playbook that you use in driving your workforce goals. And that is to continuously improve programs, we need more and better workforce data and outcomes and better data tools, not only to help colleges, but to help students, employers, regional leadership, and Sacramento here to better understand how to make investments. And we need the data not only at the institutional level, but to be able to see how those institutions impact the region as well as the state so that we can make sure that we're not oversupplying or undersupplying graduates, especially in these areas that you call high impact. Thank you.
Okay. We'll have public comment in a few moments, but questions for this panel? Do you have any, Mr. Chavez? I'll have a few, but I'll have a few. Okay. I'll start with the community colleges, just so we're right on here. You know, we had a hearing a few months ago in Ms. Irwin's district on the basic skills issue, and just eye-popping numbers of the number of students who show up to the community colleges needing to take several remedial type courses. And then further, you know, eye-popping is the fact that many of those students never actually get to take a regular class at the system. So, you know, it's still an issue that we need to address and deal with. I wasn't here during the student success, but how does the student success roll out? But how does that, how do those two things kind of mesh? Because a big part of your population, you know, they need a lot of help. They're not, you know, always progressing nicely and perfectly. That they have to repeat classes sometimes. My understanding of student success is you have to stay at a certain level and do this or that, or you don't get priority enrolling in your next classes. And so, is there an equity issue? Are some people slipping through the cracks because they're not able to figure it out and navigate?
Well, I mean, I think there are equity issues. I don't think they're rooted in the Student Success Task Force work. I mean, the equity issues are the fact that very different levels of educational achievement that students are experiencing in high schools around the state. And, you know, I think that's fundamentally what this gets back to. It's three-quarters of the students that show up at a community college are unprepared for college-level work. And disproportionately, those students come from underrepresented groups, not exclusively, but disproportionately. And that there are underlying equity issues there. I think what the Student Success Task Force work does is provides additional support and structure for those students when they arrive at a college, so that the counseling, that academic advisement, tutoring supports, those are the things that are going to make a difference. And I think that those paired with, and I would note on the counseling, there's a practice that we find very promising. It's expensive, but the outreach to high schools can be very powerful. When community colleges, for that matter, UC or CSU, can reach down into high schools and start talking to students when they're in middle school or high school to give them a clearer sense of what it takes to be ready for college, what it takes to be successful in college, so that they can plan an academic program so that they graduate from high school ready for college. It can make a big difference. Oftentimes, if you're talking about families, but if you're talking about students who come from families where nobody's ever gone to college, where very few members of the community have gone to college, it's a very foreign experience, and it can be frightening. Oftentimes there are misconceptions about the lack of ability of financial aid. There are many barriers that are very difficult to break through. And so when our colleges are able to send out counselors to engage at the middle school and high school level, it's a powerful model, and I know UC and CSU do some of the same thing as well. Okay. In addition, I would just link it back to the topic you're talking about, which is basic skills. I think some of the state's recent investment in, both in terms of the transformation, basic skills transformation program, and now the governor's proposed augmentation and ongoing funding for basic skills, all have tremendous potential for us to really overhaul the way we provide that instruction. I think we've got to crack that nut if we're going to really move the needle on completion. We're well aware of that. It's a big challenge, both in terms of the underpreparedness of many students arriving at our college, but then also, if, as you pointed out, you look at the sobering statistics on the completion in those courses, we've got a long ways to go. And so I think we've got the right conversations underway, the right planning that's underway. You see some great activity going on our colleges, but at the end of the day, what matters is moving the needle, and that's what the next phase is us paying attention to those outcomes and making sure they're moving in the right direction.
Okay, I wanted to move to the summer school issue. It kind of weaves on all these topics. The first thing, as far as getting the 1 million graduates and enrollment and graduation. We talked about this a bit yesterday at our hearing, our budget committee hearing, and you all weren't there, but your colleagues behind you were. And I know you talked to UC talked about it, your 3 pilots, and I didn't hear you talk about it, but we talked about it yesterday that at my local CSU here, the president's talking about doing this more, and there's some institutional barriers to doing this. So what could we do to push this as policymakers? It seems like a no-brainer. Those classrooms are quiet during the summer too often, and we're trying to get students out, in a shorter period of time. So I know you have the pilots, and how are you funding them now? And is there anything that you're asking from the legislature to do to help push this issue forward?
Sure. Well, I'll say one of the largest constraints for us being able to get more students to enroll in summer is that loss of the summer Pell support that we used to have. I think what we find is, particularly for our low-income students, that without that, it becomes cost prohibitive. So the 3 pilots that we're trying to implement, one is looking at providing low-cost housing, which would be really rock-bottom rates at the dormitories, so that students could continue to stay in there and then take on courses. We're also looking at one campus, if students took up to 8 units, any other additional units they would take then would not have any charges associated with them. And the third one are low-interest loans. With all of those, some of those strategies have been tried in the past. We have to see if those are financially sustainable on their own.
Are the 3 pilots at 3 campuses?
They're at 3 different campuses.
What campuses are you?
So it's San Diego, it's Berkeley, and then it's Irvine.
Okay.
And the summer session deans that we work with are keeping up to date on those practices, and we're sharing others. I mean, I do think with a lot of these items that we've found is we are trying to identify best practices and share that through the system. And summer is critical for us to be able to do that. With the 3-year degrees, major maps that we have, that can only be completed with enrollments in the summer. Mm-hmm. And we know that Summer Bridge helps our students with that first-year success. And then we've got some opportunities on the other end. So the financial issues are really probably the biggest barrier, that aid. That loss of aid.
So this wasn't an issue that you considered putting in your annual budget request to the Department of Finance to do more summer school? Is this something that you think that you can do on your own right now?
I think we're going to see what happens with those 3 pilots, and it could be something that we come back with.
Okay. CSU?
Well, first of all, I believe wholeheartedly that summer school is one of the most viable options for students for those to get them back on track, perhaps if they have not been able to reach the kinds of grades or meet the kind of grade requirements for respective courses, especially for bottleneck courses. But in addition to that, it provides the opportunity for those students to want to come in and get ahead as we talk more about being able to meet those 4-year graduation rates. And so with that, there have been challenges, just as was already expressed by Dr. Brown. First and foremost is the affordability aspect of it. And certainly we are pushing really hard as we possibly can at the federal level to try to see if we can get the summer Pell reinstituted in order to really help our students. The second part is just really building the culture for the students, a culture of summer school. It has not been a habit, if you will, that we see happening across our campuses, and largely because of the fact that students here seem to be more acclimated to the fall and the spring, largely because of affordability. But if we can certainly work, and I know that you've already referenced President Nelson, and President Nelson is doing just that at Sacramento State, really trying to understand what are those barriers that are preventing, causing those cultural barriers for students to be able to come in and really take advantage of summer school outside of just the financial piece, and working really hard to remove those barriers. Some of those could be the fact that there's not been as great of a focus on looking at bottleneck courses, those courses that their students are not performing well in the fall and spring, and knowing knowing that those would be the courses that you would target to offer during the summer to get those students back where they need to be. And then the other piece is just really trying to help students to change their mindset about, especially if we can find ways for them to financially afford it, then to be able to take advantage of knowing that you really can take coursework during the summer as well, that it feels more year-round.
Two follow-up issues. So President Nelson essentially says he wants to do it, but he can't because there's some CSU Chancellor's Office policy that they would count to his enrollment cap and so forth. And so I'm not sure if we need to address that right now. I could certainly follow up. That may be a local issue here, but maybe you want to. And then second, is this an issue that as I asked UC, what you're thinking of putting in your annual budget request to the Department of Finance in the fall to focus on summer? Because I think it's something that was part of the issue that the governor and the president of UC in the 2x2 process talked about this, and it seems like it would be embraced by policymakers here in Sacramento.
Let me start with the question specifically that you referenced in terms of constraints that President Nelson may have described. The reality is, as each campus looks at their enrollment plan for the year, they're working within a finite full-time equivalency student target. So they're determining the best way to distribute that traditionally across their fall and spring terms. And in some campuses, they've really thought through that also expanding to distribute that into summer is also in their best interest. Again, looking at their student makeup, the demands, the bottlenecks that Dr. Blanchard referenced. So each campuses had to look at that and strategize how best to distribute that, because it is a finite amount of FTS instructional cost and resources that they end up distributing. Whether a campus decides it's in their best interest to meet their enrollment and student success goals to just target that at a traditional fall and spring, or if it makes sense in their case to distribute it across three, that's something that each campus looks at. But they're all working with a finite amount of instructional dollars and resources. And so in President Nelson's case, he's trying to sort of work through the best way to distribute that. Does it make sense across the two, or is he's leaning towards to distribute across the two traditional terms and add in summer as well?
Well, that really does nothing to our issue, because we don't want to put the two spread apart to the third. It's keep the two whole and add more to the third. Then we're not getting any bang for the buck. And
absolutely. So I think that to then the second part, I think that is the bigger aspect here is really increasing enrollment funding that comes from the state to allow us to do that. That would allow campuses to take advantage of summer, or in some cases be able to absorb even more demand during the traditional fall and spring terms. The one thing I would add, similar to UC, and this goes back to our bigger conversation around preparation. Since 2011, the CSU has also operated our Early Start program, which brings incoming first-time freshmen that need any developmental work in either English or mathematics to summer sessions, and that can be done physically on the campus or online. We have over 26,000 students now participating in that, predominantly in face-to-face situations. And again, sort of being very strategic with distributing resources, in this case, lottery dollars, to help offset instructional cost in the summer. That's been one way we've been able to do some sort of targeted piloting. And in the most recent instance of that, in this past summer, that brought 6,000 more students up to college readiness by the start of the fall term that would have otherwise not been in that situation. So there are some other strategic ways that we're using summer as well.
Okay. I'll have some UC enrollment and non-resident questions in a second, but Mr. Medina wanted to follow up on summer school.
Summer school, my understanding as a UC student quite a while back, pays for itself. Classes?
Many of them have, they enroll both UC students and then non-UC students, and that is a revenue-generating operation. And there are some efforts and some support provided to summer programs, but they also operate as best as they can as self-supporting.
And what the student pays for those classes is oftentimes more. Is that correct? Because you're paying for one class, maybe two classes.
Right, and I think that's part of some of the strategies that we're looking at with some of these pilots, like that one that we have at Irvine, where students end up paying up to 8 units, but then could add on additional units and take more, but at the same cost as what 8 would be.
But traditionally, it's been more expensive to the student.
It is if they, particularly if they don't get the kind of financial aid that they would have gotten in the regular term.
If they're just paying for units. Is that the same at CSU? That it turns out to be more expensive to take classes in the summer?
It varies. In some of the campuses, yes, it is more expensive during the summer than the traditional fall, spring. In others, it's more economical, and that's been strategic because of the fact that some of the presidents really want to make sure that we can get more students to take advantage of those summer courses, and so they have worked to get that rate down during the summer.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, okay, I'll go back to my to my UC question. This is kind of an informational hearing, and we talked about this at length yesterday, and we're going to go in this to more at the at our budget hearings. But I'm focused on this issue of enrollment, and specifically for Californians. And Mr. Medina and I have legislation on this, but I just want to kind of, put back on you. To paraphrase, I think what you said earlier is that during the recession, you had to really deal with this non-resident policy to bring money in for the system. At some point, the UC, I think the regents in 2010, they looked at having a cap of 10%. We were much lower then, saying, hey, let's do this for a while, and we'll cap at 10, and there is no cap here. And I'm just at a loss because something that you said, and to paraphrase it, is that non-resident enrollment helps the UC and helps ensure that we have access for California students. And so there's, those are kind of your words, but the numbers the facts just don't add up to me. If you look at our agenda and the numbers that, this past year we had 1,600 fewer California freshmen entering and 4,600 more non-residents entering UC. And the answer is, that's kind of a blip. It was a mistake. Our yield rate wasn't right. And so, okay, we'll give you that. But if you go back 8 to 10 years, it's the same thing. California enrollment has gone down by 2%, by about 1,500 students, and has gone up by 335% for non-resident students, about 8,000, about the size of eventually UC Merced in a couple years. So it just doesn't jive that you're telling Californians, not just us, but the state of California taxpayers, hey, this helps you all go to college, when the numbers show the opposite. So we don't get it.
Right. So I guess a couple things. First, the non-resident tuition has helped the campuses be able to provide additional courses and support. So, for example, with one campus, with the Berkeley campus, they use non-resident tuition to provide additional common good courses like reading and comprehension, and the entry-level courses like the gateway classes in mathematics and computer science and other places like that. When we look at the trends that we have here, and I think what you're referencing on page 7 of the document, it does show a decline over the two time periods of 2007 to 2015 for 2% for freshmen and a growth for California resident transfers of 17% over that period. What I was saying was that if we cut back the numbers of non-resident students, it doesn't necessarily correspond with the growth of resident students. What corresponds with the growth of resident students is exactly what we're doing this year. When we receive state support to provide support for us to have those students on campus, we find a place for them to be enrolled, and we're actively engaged in meeting that goal this year of enrolling 5,000 additional residents across the UC system. And our hope is that we can continue to work with the legislature to continue to expand that access and add another 5,000 resident enrollments across. And I guess the piece that I would emphasize...
Just to clarify,
sure.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, didn't the number go up to 6,500 because...
Yeah, so if I'm comparing the numbers to 2014-15, it's the over 5,000 numbers. If I compare it to the prior year, then it's the number that you're referencing, the 6,700.
To make up for the number of the increase of out-of-state and
No, to make up for the drop that we had
The drop,
last year.
okay.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. The issue that we had last year and the challenge that we have is with the admission cycle and the budget cycle, with the calendars being off. The guidance that we provided the campuses was to hold flat on California residents because we didn't have an agreement in place about funding additional residents. And our hope long term is that we can build a multi-year agreement about growth for California residents. I think that sends a message to high school students and their families that we're working together on expanding access to the UC system. It also helps campuses plan. If they know that we're hoping to continue to expand and we're working on getting funding to do so over multiple years, that helps us in thinking through curriculum planning and other things that will make it easier for students to be able to get access to the courses that they need. And I just emphasize that with the outcomes that we've got, the graduation rates, that we think it's a very good investment for the state. And that's part of our hope, is to work with you on expanding what we've got in place right now to continue to add additional funded seats for the future.